The third tiebreaker game of the 2016 World Chess Championship took place after having drawn both of the first two games. For those of you who've been following my video series here on YouTube, you already know that game one was a draw with Sergey Karjakin playing the white pieces. And then Magnus Carlsen brought the house, achieved a winning advantage, although once again failed to convert against incredibly stubborn defense against the Russian in game two. And this, my friends, is what happened in game three. After highlighting the fact that it seems like no other conclusion could possibly be drawn at this point about Magnus Carlsen's play than other than he's just out of form, not playing well, not converting on his opportunities. Sergey Karjakin, on the other hand, is defending when he's down, finding all of the only moves when he truly has to find them, and it seems like at some point one of these sides is going to have to give. Carlsen is going to have to find a way to start converting on advantages, or Sergey Karjakin maybe gets a big win with white and takes the world championship. Certainly playing the black pieces after blowing a winning advantage with white could not be fun for the Norwegian as he went into this game. And once again, they've repeated the same opening that they played not only in the first tiebreaker game, so you can back up and see that video, but also in game 11 of the match, and then also game 2 of the match. So this position has been played multiple times, and finally, for the first time, we actually see Carlsen say, throw away with my worries about whether Karjakin's team has come up with anything in the lab, in their hotel room. I'm going back to what I did when I first achieved a comfortable position as black against this line with the move knight a5 and then bishop to e6. This position is exactly what we had on the board in game 2. And in game 2, Sergey Karjakin, if you want to go see that video, of course, it's on my personal YouTube channel, played the move d4. It was noted in our analysis in that video and all the Chess Center coverage we did of Game 2 that the other move in the position is the move b4. And this is the move that had been played by probably more strong GMs before this game, with Karjakin playing d4 in Game 2. And on that note, on that foreshadowing note, Sergey Karjakin actually played the move b4 here, rather than trying to repeat what he did against Magnus Carlsen in game 2. Sort of interesting that, from my perspective, if you were looking for an improvement, you would think you would be repeating a little bit more of what you did in game 2 versus the world champion, but apparently not. Apparently he'd rather play into b4, which is the road more commonly traveled. And after knight to c6, he immediately plays knight to d5. This is exactly the kind of structure that we got in game 11. So though the move order is different here, this is exactly the kind of game that we had there, with both sides putting their knights on d4. It's going to be a close position, so black is less worried about losing the bishop pair, and white has to make some big decisions about the kind of center you want to have. In game 11, we had a position where the trade on d4 actually occurred, and at some point you saw black using the queenside majority. But not here. In this game, Karjakin, analyzing all these games, Carlsen and Karjakin start the same way. Easy to have a tongue twister. Played the move knight to g5, which at first hand seems interesting. Okay, the challenger is ready for blood. He just defended a lost position as black, and now he's white looking to play an aggressive line. But what's strange was the lack of follow-up. After knight to g5, which clearly aims to dislodge the bishop, Carlsen gives up the bishop pair and then immediately retreats this knight with a tempo, which not only serves to have an immediate tactical threat, but also to clear up the potential of the f-pawn driving home. Now, we all know that we should be attacking in the direction of our pawn structure, always swim with the river, not against it. And so it makes nothing but positional sense that Carlsen would retreat this knight and go for this line, which means if you played this line as Karjakin, you would have certainly had something prepared for this approach by black, because it's the most logical positional idea that black can execute in this position. But here, rather than go back to f3, which might be something that's a little bit more passive, it seems, but it does avoid the tempos Carlsen gained, Karjakin decided he was going to allow those tempos with knight e4. Carlsen says, I'll take the opportunity, and then f4. And suddenly it became very, very strange when you realize that Karjakin once again failed to show anything really at home. Carlsen has spent all this time avoiding knight a5, going into the variation that he played very early on in the match for all the strategy reasons we've talked about, avoiding any improvements by the Russian team. And so you would think that there would be something in mind for white to repeat here, or if not improving on an earlier game. If you're not going to repeat, then have something well prepared in the new position. But it didn't seem that that was the case, and suddenly Karjakin is immediately on his toes, with black having a very strong knight and the threats on the king side already being a reality. c3 is played, which makes a lot of sense. You kick the knight back to f5. But regardless of what the engine says above me, that's really there just for the confirmation for those who just want to make sure that when Danny says things, he's not totally full of it. I respect that. And you want to make sure if I say something, the computer doesn't say, Danny, you're saying black is winning, and the computer says white is up +5. Most of the time, the engine should be there as sort of a guiding force, kind of like a Gandalf on your Frodo journey to Mordor, okay? The computer should be seen as a helpful hand guiding you, but not necessarily the ultimate determining factor, at least in terms of what plans you're choosing, what strategical ideas you're trying to execute. Tactically, yes, they are the gods, they are the kings, but regardless of whether the computer still believes the position is roughly equal, I look at this position as just being so much easier for black to play. Black has so many natural moves, and the way the players spent the next 10-15 moves told me all I needed to know, which was Karjakin immediately felt he was on the defensive side of things, which means he wasn't that well prepared for Carlsen to repeat the thing he did in Game 2, which means that Jan Ludwig Hammer's opinion of Karjakin's approach in the opening in this match seems more and more accurate, that Karjakin just wanted to play a Ruy Lopez, which is just a maneuvering kind of game, but that's kind of right up Carlsen's alley. So again, just strange to see here, and not trying to foreshadow the result of the game at all, because we still have plenty to play. But if I'm evaluating the opening stage, I'm just less than impressed, and I apologize for going so quickly through the beginning part of things, but all those of you who've been following all my videos on the World Championship match on my YouTube channel and Chess.com's channel, I've already talked about this Ruy Lopez in the opening stage so much. Really, the critical moments are happening now. And as I said, so here come the natural moves. Queen e8. Could anything be more natural? Bring more pieces to the king side. Queen to g6. That's exactly what the doctor ordered. Bishop to b3 seems like a weird move, but I don't exactly see what the concrete plan is for white in the position. And now f3 is played, which, if anything, shows nerves, shows that white is worried about black's attack, and it's a clear concession, right? Because you're playing this move only because you must be worried about tactical threats. Knight h4 is coming, which hits g2. And if the rook is open, well, now f3 is a threat. So clearly white is worried about the coming threats. Karjakin actually spent a decent amount of time on this move and then played f3. So again, it's just a tough position to be in as white, to have to start making conceding moves like that are giving up so much control over the dark squares. The bishop pair is a total non-factor in this game. I don't want to make it seem like Karjakin never had any improvements. Probably, if I'm going to suggest one, it would be here. And I would be looking, if I was white, to play moves like a4 or c4. I don't even care about the d4 square. I'd be looking to do anything to create active counterplay, despite what the computer says or anything. White has to look to open the position for the bishops. You have to look for counterplay. That didn't happen, and once f3 is played, black is the one in the driver's seat. Here comes bishop h4. a4 is played. The knight comes into f6. Again, Carlsen's goals are very simple. I'm going to bring everything over to the king side and see what happens. Karjakin now plays the move a4, which is the logical thing we would expect white to do, to use the queen side and try to open up some things for the bishop. But the real problem is that the forcing sequence that now occurs after knight f6, white is worried about things on e4, so the queen comes to e2 to defend. a5 is the first move that really shows that Carlsen is not going to be content, and he's not beating himself up or worried about not converting on a win in the last game with the two bishops for the rook. He's looking to win again, and I think he recognized that he was better. So for the opening to go so quickly into black's favor is really a shock. And he wants to create avenues of entry on both sides of the board, right? That's a sign of him feeling confident that the pressure here is practical against the king, which is just always makes your opponent nervous, and that he has the ability to be that aggressive, right? He's ready to open things up. Let's mix it up. Takes, and now bishop to d2. Karjakin is looking to sacrifice that pawn in order to complete development, which makes sense. The only real problem with it is that the bishop, in order to guard d4, gives up e3. If the bishop comes back to e3, d4 is falling. So the potential of these dark squares becoming a real issue is already sort of looming out there. And the pawn structure itself is a King's Indian, really. Forget the fact that this came from a Spanish. Forget the fact that it came from a Lopez, a Spanish game. The pawn structure here is one that you would see normally in a King's Indian, with the one exception that black didn't fee and kettle the bishop. Black has an attack, and what white needs against the King's Indian structure is always pressure against the base. If you're playing the white side of these positions where white is trying to attack on the queen side to compensate for black's pressure, white needs to have pressure against c7 ASAP, because when c7 falls, d6 might fall, and if d6 might fall, e5 might fall, and you do the math on where we're headed with that. White's goals have to be aggressive there, and unfortunately for white, it feels like he's just a day late and a dollar short in terms of that necessary plan. Here comes the knight into e3, and after rook to c1, trades on a1 just to make sure there's not going to be any pressure coming to c7. The queen relocates, but not because she's necessarily conceding. There's issues with white's queenside right now. Currently, there's a weak b5 pawn. I've run up against a little bit of a lack of concrete moves, I guess, on the king side. So this move makes sense. But after bishop to c4, king h8, Karjakin starts to lose his cool a little bit himself and doesn't quite know now how to sit on the position. King h8 threatens something that's going to bring us into the full King's Indian transposition. That is to play a move like g5. Why isn't a move like g5 really possible before? Well, among other things, I think with the king being on this diagonal, there may be some potential threats. Sometimes there's ideas where you sack the b6 pawn to open up pressure against the d6 pawn. So I think king h8 is a very useful prophylactic move. Prepares for g5 to be that much stronger when you do play it without counterplay. And in some cases, maybe even opens up the g8 square for the rook. So king h8 makes sense. And Karjakin, I really need to slow down a little bit, don't I, everybody? Karjakin decides he doesn't want to just sit on the position and trades on f6. He did so with the idea that maybe he could sit tight here with less minor pieces for black. Maybe there's less chances that I get checkmated. At least that's what he's telling himself. But unfortunately, this approach of trading on f6 to avoid the advancing of the g-pawn, trying to take some minors off the board, backfires very quickly for Karjakin. And since the engine still doesn't see the move, even for those of you who would rely on the engine, I'll give you a chance to think here on what the most thematic approach is for black. And it's the kind of move that had the chat going wild as I was watching the game live, because the computer valuation initially goes nuts. But all the strong players were like, wow, what a phenomenal approach to the position. What a fantastic idea. And it's very Zurich 1953-esque by David Braunstein. If you haven't read Zurich 1953 by David Braunstein, you're missing out. Talking about what matters in chess is square control, the ability to create threats, the value and activity and placement of your pieces is far more important than the number of them that you have. That doesn't mean you can win if you're down 10 pieces, okay? But the ability to control a certain area of the board and the ability to really restrict your opponent via one avenue. If you over-dominate a color complex, we've already been talking about the fact that black owns the dark squares, usually that gives you access to other areas of the board because you've strangled your opponent so hard on one area. It's like the tip we give that an opscode bishop attacking positions, they can favor the person who's attacking because the other bishop just sort of feels like a bystander. If you're attacking on the dark squares, the light square bishop feels useless, and vice versa if you're attacking on the light squares. So all those tips coming into your mind, looking to control the board via the dominance of your dark squares if you're black, looking to increase your concrete access to those squares despite whether you have to give up some material or not, and strategically making sure that you can control and create threats, making sure that's the more important thought in your mind rather than the small amount of material you have. All those things should lead you to having found Carlsen's brilliant move, and that is the move e4 exclam. Forget about what the computer says. After takes, we shake and bake. The queen comes into e5. Not only is black going to dominate because control over the dark squares and immediate tactical threats, but the a file combined with the pressure that the queen holds on the a1 square means that white is White is already begging for life. The position is falling apart. There's threats like queen to d4, followed by the rook infiltrating, and White has no pressure. As I said, White's a day late and a dollar short for any kind of concrete counterplay on the c-file, and you'll notice the evaluation already is like slowly trending back toward it. At first, White was so happy to be up a pawn. But no, Karjakin recognized what was happening here. He gets himself in big trouble. h3, h6, slow moves are played because Karjakin really can't prevent what's coming. The queen enters into d4, and after the queen goes to e1, here comes more concrete threats. Queen to b2, bishop f1, rook to a2, hitting the g2 square. This is a nightmare, nightmare, nightmare and a half. Probably the last chance that White has here is to try to play tickle, something like rook to b1. If Black plays tickle, then we keep tickling because we're losing. But once the queen comes back to either e5 or f6, the threat of queen g5 is just winning. So White has to play h4, and really the position is just, it's one that White can't hold because it's only a matter of time before something concrete happens with the g2 pawn falling here. The threats against the king. I mean, I didn't even come up in my preparation with a winning plan to prove that Black would have still been winning had Karjakin not blundered, but I'm sure there's a number of them, including advancing the g-pawn, making moves like rook to d2 just to make sure the queen is completely strangled, and then tactics with knight to c2 seem to actually trap the queen. So there's just and the fact that the computer now realizes Black is winning, despite the fact that Black is down a pawn, should tell you how tough this position was for Karjakin. And so on that note, he took on c7 rather than playing tickle, and immediately resigned after the move rook a1, which is just a skewer of the queen to the bishop, winning a piece for nothing, and followed by mate, really. So there you go. The tables completely turned in this match with Magnus Carlsen winning the third tiebreaker game as Black. I guess to highlight any more defensive opportunities, maybe here instead of king h2, the computer has been saying this move queen to d2 for a while. But again, it's so hard to say that sitting tight is any kind of solution. Yeah, I love rook a1. You can't trade, by the way, because then I take with check and then win your bishop. White is hanging by a thread, and that might be the most PG way to describe what's going on with White right now. It's just a completely bogus position. Dominance of the dark squares, complete control over the only critical areas, and White being way too behind in terms of the necessary counterplay to be able to play this game. So a huge win for Magnus Carlsen coming in Game 3 of the tiebreakers. And just to show you again, instant replay of what happened, there it was. Moving into Game 4, the World Championship is on the line with a one-game lead in the rapid tiebreak. All Magnus Carlsen needs now is a draw with White, but the challenger has proven himself worthy to this point. We're going to see what happens right now. Make sure you click to the next video and watch Game 4.